Welcome everybody. I believe you're all being let in to this afternoon's session. Hope you have landed well. My name's Christy Spire and I'm the team leader of Nature Education here at Green Adelaide, coming to you from Kaurna country. Ngadlu Tambathi, Ngadlu Ghana, Yatanga, Imperenthi. It's always important to acknowledge that we are meeting on Kaurna country and that we pay respects to their spiritual connections with this place and their practical, tangible, cultural connections with this place. And I'm always honoured to learn and grow with our Kaurna colleagues across Adelaide. Had the joy of celebrating with them recently at Reconciliation SA's annual gala. And so it's great to stop and celebrate the achievements and the working together across Adelaide that's happening with Kaurna. So this is our 8th instalment of our seminar series for 2024, can you believe it, which we are running to help share the great work happening to make Adelaide cooler, greener, wilder and more climate resilient. This session is being recorded and will be available on the Green Adelaide YouTube after the point. So if you enjoy it, make sure you share it with your friends. You're invited to ask questions at any time by putting them into the chat. Your microphones are all turned off today, and we will answer as many of these as we can at the end of the session. So just to make sure you realise where you are, we're in a session about frogs of Greater Adelaide with Steve Walker. Frogs play a crucial role in our ecosystems, and their sensitivity to environmental changes makes them excellent indicators of the health of our landscapes and ecosystems. Today, Steve Walker, resident frog expert at Green Adelaide and passionate advocate for citizen science, will share his wealth of knowledge about our local frogs, introduce us to the new seasonal frog census, and show us how the FrogWatch app allows communities to actively contribute to frog research. So we hope you can get active today. Steve is an education officer with Green Adelaide and has spent nearly 30 years leading South Australia's frog monitoring initiatives. He's also the co-author of the 3rd edition of Frogs of South Australia, worth getting your hands on, and currently coordinates the award-winning FrogWatch SA program. So it's awesome to have you online today, Steve. I'll let you take over.
Great, thank you. It's nice to be here. I'll just hopefully get this presentation started. Oops, I have forgotten to do the audio.
Oh yeah, do your audio first before jumping in. Brilliant.
Okay.
Yep, all good. Good
Beautiful.
to go. Thanks, Steve.
So in this seminar today, I'm going to be giving you a brief overview of the FrogWatch SA program and the Frog Spotter smartphone app. And also I'll talk to you about the 4 most commonly encountered frogs in suburban Adelaide. I don't have time today to go through every single type of frog in Adelaide, but I'll talk to you about the 4 most common ones. So FrogWatch SA is a citizen science program which commenced in 2015 as an extension of the EPA frog census. And the EPA frog census ran from about 1994 to 2007 before it was handed over to the Adelaide and Matt Lofty Ranges Natural Resources Management Board and then Zoos SA. It's currently managed by Green Adelaide with support from the Murraylands and Riverlands Landscape Board. So 2024 is effectively the 30th anniversary of community frog surveys in South Australia. And over that time, we've had about 30,000 records submitted. And Rupert Mathwin, who's a frog ecologist at Flinders University, he recently reviewed the South Australian combined frog data. And he reports that over 87% of all the records of frogs in South Australia have been collected through FrogWatch and Frog Census. And more than twice as many species have been reported by citizen scientists than has been collected by government scientists over that time. And there's no routine monitoring of frogs in South Australia other than the FrogWatch program. And the good thing about the FrogWatch program is that citizen scientists can submit recordings at any time of the year, and they can collect data from areas that scientists can't easily get access to. So we are able to collect a much richer picture of the frog populations in South Australia. It's all done through the Frog Spotter smartphone app, which is available for Android and iPhone devices. And using the app, you can collect some simple information about the site and the weather as well as the frog recordings. And once you submit those surveys, they are uploaded to the Frog SA website, where they can be verified by expert listeners. And this year we've also started seasonal snapshots or seasonal censuses of the frogs in South Australia. So for the first week of each season, we are encouraging people to get out there and make surveys of frogs so that we can get a bit more information about frogs, and particularly some of those frogs that are not active during the peak breeding seasons. So we have the winter census in the first week of June, the spring census just gone in the first week of September, then we've got one in summer for the first week of December, and then autumn the first week of March, and hopefully these will roll on from year to year. So this is what the Frog Spotter app looks like. This is the Android version. The iPhone version is very similar, but has got slight differences in style, just as a result of being on a different platform. There are two main parts of the Frog Spotter app. This one is the frog section. So it's basically a field guide to the frogs of South Australia, where you can play the calls of most of the species of frogs that we have. You can see photographs and get some of the descriptions about what these frogs look like, how you might be able to identify them, and see a variety of different photos and the areas where they are found. So it's a nice little tool that you can take out with you. And if you listen to a frog in the field, you can play back a recording and go, is that the one that I'm listening to? So it's a nice little tool for that. For me, the most important section is the survey section. So this is where you can go out and make the recordings and send them in to us. So there's 5 main parts to the survey section: the place and location or your site, the frog species, the photos, the environment, and that record function for the audio. And as you go through and complete a section, you'll get a little green tick to show you that you're going through it successfully. And we've tried to make it as simple as possible. You don't have to have any prior knowledge about frogs or doing surveys of frogs. You can simply go out there, push record your audio for 3 to 5 minutes, and put in some of this environment data. And we've got little tick boxes and drop down menus to make it really simple. So for example, if we ask you the temperature, you don't have to go out and say that it's 26.2 degrees. You can just choose from the drop down, hot, cold, mild, things like that, to make it really easy. Once you hit submit, those recordings, as I said, go straight to the FrogWatch website. Anybody on the planet can then look and listen to those surveys that you've done. You can do a search for a particular species or region or a time period and get that information popping up. And then you can simply click on the survey to find out more. So for example, this is a survey that I did in Harndorf a few years ago. You can play back the recording so you can hear exactly what I recorded at that time. You can see any of the photos that I took, and if you click on a photo, it'll open up a larger view. You can see the habitat and weather information down the bottom, and there's a simple little interactive Google map, so you can click on that and open up a larger map and see where that site was in relation to the wider area. It's also interesting that you can see the frogs that the person submitted that they thought they were hearing. So in this case, the user published frog information. I've said there that I heard the common froglet and the eastern banjo frog. When that was then verified by an expert, that was me, I agreed with myself. So I was quite happy that I got that right. Nice little tick there to say you've done a good job. Anybody can download the raw data, so you can simply click and export the data. You can also just view it on the website. We do regularly send the results to the Biological Database of South Australia and then onto the Atlas of Living Australia. So it's easily accessible by anybody on the planet. One thing I will mention though is because anybody can listen to the recordings, you do need to be aware of what it is you're recording. For instance, in the past, I've had some people who've made surveys and they've been slagging off their boss the whole way through making the recording. So that's probably something that they don't want everybody on the planet to hear. So if you are going to make a recording, it's best to just push record, stay quiet, let the recording go for 3 to 5 minutes and then stop it. And then you can slag off your boss. Just don't do it while the recording's being made. So you may wonder why on earth we would be interested in monitoring frogs. Well, there's a few key reasons. Like birds, frogs are deeply embedded in many cultures. They're important symbols in art, literature, religion, magic, superstition, the world over. So they're a great marketing tool. But importantly, frogs are considered one of the most endangered groups of animals on the planet. So the frogs, which are the amphibians, which include the tailless frogs and toads, the tailed newts and salamanders, and the legless caecilians, are under significant impact throughout the world. And you can compare that to, for example, the mammals, where about 27% of mammals are facing extinction, 25% of freshwater fish, about 21% of reptiles, and 13% of birds. So the amphibians are faring pretty badly. They're also a major link between the freshwater and terrestrial ecosystems. So they're a major source of food for lots of predators, such as the reptiles like the crocodiles and the snakes. Lots of mammals, lots of birds, and lots of invertebrates rely on frogs as a source of food. And frogs are also important because they eat a lot of the other creatures in the environment, particularly the invertebrates. So they're really good at cycling the nutrients between the freshwater and the terrestrial ecosystems. They're also considered a little bit like the canaries in the coal mine. So they're very sensitive to pollution and habitat loss. So they give us a really good indication of how the environment is faring. So we can use them as key biological indicators. And the really good thing about using frogs as biological indicators is you don't actually have to see them or catch them to use them. Most species can easily be recognized by their distinctive mating call. So by simply going out and making a recording, we can get a lot of information about those frogs. So if you were going to go out and look for frogs around Adelaide, what are the ones you're most likely to see? Well, there's 6 different species which are considered local natives, and there's also 1 translocated species. And 4 of these species are commonly encountered around metropolitan areas. So some of them are really happy to live around humans. We do have the Frogs of the Mount Lofty Ranges ID chart available to download from the Green Adelaide website if you want to find out a bit more. But going through the species one by one, the most commonly encountered frog is the common froglet. And it's not surprising, given its common name, common froglet, that it's commonly encountered. Why is it called a froglet? Well, simply because it's small. So when we measure a frog, we measure from the tip of the nose to the backside. So basically that snout to vent length. And the common froglet grows only to about 3 centimetres in length. So small common froglet. Despite being very common, they are really cool, interesting frogs. They come in a whole range of different skin colours, patterns, and textures. So they're always earthy sorts of colours. So anything from the creams, the browns, the yellows, the reds, and the blacks. And they can be in combinations of colours. So they may be mainly one colour or have combinations of these colours. Some of them have got stripes. Some of them have got spots. Some have got colours just blotching, spreading through each other. And interestingly, some of them are really smooth. Some of them are covered in lots of little warts. Some of them have got ridges running down their back. And some of them are termed lyrate. And lyrate basically means that they have 2 lyre-shaped ridges running down their back. So the lyre is the old medieval musical instrument. So it looks a little bit like a harp, or if you imagine 2 boomerangs running down the side of their back. And I'll show you a photograph of those in just a minute to illustrate that. They have got really long legs and long skinny toes. And one thing you'll notice is they don't have webbing between their toes. So interestingly, many of the frogs around Adelaide are unwebbed. So they have their single loose digits like us, and that really helps them get around in a whole variety of different environments. So the common froglet, you can find them in streams and swamps, wetlands, dams, ponds, rivers, pretty much anywhere where you find a little bit of fresh water, you can find the common froglet. So they're really well adapted to living in a whole range of different environments. The call that they make is often confused with insects. So sometimes I've had people send in a recording and say there are no frogs, but I've made the recording anyway. And I listen to it and I can hear hundreds of them calling. So they're quite an interesting little call, and I'll play it for you. And now hopefully you'll hear it.
Common froglet, Criniosignifera.
So some of these froglets make a single little crick, others have a rapidly repeated series of cricks. So they can go on and on and on. So it's quite interesting that they don't all sound exactly the same, but they're all the same species. Males typically have got that dark brown or dirty yellow throat, and the belly of a common froglet is made up of these little black and white spots. It's a really rough belly, and sometimes the spots join together to form a little bit of a stripe, like a zebra, but it's a really rough pixelated stripe. It's not a nice clean line. It's all those spots stuck together. And when these frogs mate, they typically lay between 100 and 150 eggs, laid in clumps in the vegetation within the water. And the male holds on to the female behind her back, gives her a gentle squeeze. That's a signal to her to start laying the eggs. She will lay the eggs in the water, and then the male will fertilize them externally. So here's some examples of the different colors that you can see of these frogs. So up in the top right-hand corner, the very smooth skin. This one's predominantly one color across its back, the brown, then with the grays and the blacks along the side. In comparison, the warty one down in the bottom left corner, lots and lots of little warts all over its body. And the one up in the top left has got those parallel lines, those ridges running down its back. And then down in the bottom right, that interesting one, the lyrate one, where you can see those two parallel boomerang-like ridges running down its back. And you can get combinations of these. So it's not unusual to find a warty one with the lyrate ridges running down its back. Obviously, you wouldn't have one which was smooth and combined with something else, because you would just call it the other thing. So if it's smooth with lyrate, you'd just call it lyrate. But amazing little creatures found everywhere. Sometimes people like me will go, yeah, I've heard it so many times, I've seen it so many times. But if you really think about it, when you do encounter one, it's pretty special to see them. People often think, oh, a cute little baby frog because they're so small. But I always say to them, no, it's not a baby frog. It's an adult frog. A baby frog is a tadpole. It's a beautiful little 3 centimetre common froglets. Another frog which is commonly encountered around Adelaide is called the spotted marsh frog, also known as the spotted grass frog. These ones grow to about 5 centimetres in length, and they typically have got a green or brown spots on a grey, cream or brown body, and they often have a stripe running down their back, which around Adelaide tends to be this yellow, white or cream colour. They can be quite variable in their colours, so they don't always look exactly the same. So here's some examples. They can be really pale cream or quite dark brown, but always with those darker spots. And as I said, sometimes with a stripe, sometimes without. And if you go down into the southeast of South Australia and also into Victoria, you can often get them with a red stripe running down their back. But so far, I've never seen one with a red stripe around Adelaide. But beautiful little frogs. As with the common froglet, the male tends to have a darker throat. and the female actually has flaps of skin on her first two fingers. And this is the key feature for distinguishing males and females. Sometimes people say, if it's got a stripe, is it a boy? No, no stripe, a girl? No, both males and females can have a stripe, but the female does get the flaps of skin on her thumb and the next finger. And these form broad pads. And when they're mating, with the male holding onto the female behind her back, she will lift her arms in a motion which is a little bit like the breaststroke, but they don't move through the water. And what she is doing is she lifts her arm out of the water, and then she grabs a bubble of air with those flaps of skin and pushes it down through the water between her legs, and she mixes that up with the eggs as she lays the eggs. And this creates a foam mass that then floats on the surface of the water attached to the vegetation. And I'll show you a picture of that in just a second. One of the things I really like about the spotted marsh frog is the fact that their coloration looks so much like the soldiers' camouflage gear. And I think that's pretty cool because the collective noun for frogs is an army. So you can imagine there's little frog soldiers as part of a bigger frog army. But even better, the mating call of the spotted marsh frog around Adelaide sounds like a machine gun or a toy machine gun.
Spotted grass frog, Limnodonastes tasmaniensis, western call race.
So you can really imagine these little frog soldiers with their machine guns in the grasses and the reeds as part of this frog army. So this is what the foam nest looks like, floating on the surface of the water. And there's a close-up of the female's hand. You can see that the two inner fingers at the bottom of the picture are wider than the outer fingers. So that's those flaps that she uses to create that little foam nest. And that foam nest has got a diameter of about 5 to 7 centimeters, about 1,500 eggs in that foam nest. And we think the foam nest acts as a way of protecting the eggs from predators like fish, because the foam nest sticks together really quite well. It's like snot, basically. And if you get a fish coming along trying to separate one of those eggs from the foam nest, actually the snot sticks together and makes it really difficult for the fish to separate out those eggs. So that'll help protect them for a week or so before the tadpoles hatch out. And the full development from egg to frog can be as little as 3 months in the spotted marsh frog. And that's still quite slow compared to the common froglet, which I mentioned earlier, because they can go from egg to frog in as little as 28 days. So they're quite well adapted to living in relatively dry conditions in South Australia, where the waterways do dry up over summer. Here's a little video that I took a couple of weeks ago in Mount Barker. Just show you that sometimes these frogs are really good at finding little refuge sites where there's a little bit of moisture in the soil. It's not unusual to turn over a log or a rock and have 20, 30, 40 of these frogs. And as you see, as soon as you disturb it, they scatter to make their escape. So it's pretty cool when you encounter something like that. Closely related to the spotted marsh frog is the eastern banjo frog. This is the largest frog that we get around Adelaide, and these ones grow to about 8.5 or 9 centimetres. It's about the size of my fist. This is a frog which a lot of people call the pobblebonk. And I often say to them, why do you call it a pobblebonk? And they say, that's the noise that they make. And I always reply, no, it's not. The noise they make is bonk. If you hear pobblebonk, that's actually 3 frogs repeating the call in a series. So I'd be quite happy for them to call them bonks. I just think pobblebonk is incorrect. I prefer eastern banjo frog. But they're amazing, beautiful frogs. You've probably all heard the call that they make. If you go to a wetland and you hear them calling, what I would recommend doing is just standing still and have a bit of a listen. And you will notice that the call is a little bit like a Mexican wave moving around the wetland. You don't get every frog calling at exactly the same time. And I think the reason for that is the mating call is made by the male to attract the female. And if all the males talk at exactly the same time, the female won't be able to hear what's going on. She won't be able to choose the one that she thinks is really sexy. But if they take it in turns, she'll be able to have a nice close listen and she can go, yes, you're the one that I want to mate with, and she can go and choose him. So pretty cool experience. If you're in the middle of a wetland at night and there's all these frogs going on around you, you've got this beautiful 5.1 surround sound going on. So quite amazing experience. Interestingly, eastern banjo frogs have got some quite interesting adaptations to help protect them. So one of the things that is a key feature for these frogs is the large glands on the back of the leg. These are called tibial glands, and they actually secrete a little bit of a poison, which is designed to make them taste really bad. Hopefully the predators leave them alone. And also around the edge of the mouth, you'll see another large gland, which is called the supralabial gland. And this gland is like a little chemical factory, and it actually produces 3 different types of chemicals. One of them is called a mucus gland, and these ones produce a chemical that helps them with water regulation, so they won't dry out too much. They also produce a chemical called a seromucus, and this is a watery mucus, which helps them with healing their skin, helps them fight diseases. So it's a nice little medicine for them. And then they've got the granular glands. So again, these ones are the ones which produce some of those poisons designed to taste really disgusting, repel the predators. So interesting little things that they have in their skin. And these frogs are not poisonous or not deadly to humans. So if you see one hopping across the road or in your garden, or even if it comes into your house, it's okay to pick it up, have a look at it, help it on its way. But I do really recommend that you wash your hands really well after touching them, and wash them with soapy water. Don't just rinse them under the tap and think you're going to be good, because the poisons, the chemicals that these frogs produce in their skin don't wash out in water. And if you think about it, that makes perfect sense. If you had a frog that had poison that washed out in water, it's not going to be very effective, because as soon as they produce it, it'll wash off and the predators can eat them. If you get it in your eyes, it stings. It absolutely kills. If you can imagine someone has got a little sewing needle, has heated it over a fire till it's red hot, and then is jabbing it in your eyeball, that's what it feels like. It's incredibly painful. Unfortunately, I know this from experience. I was at a pet shop and they had a couple of these frogs, and they said, "Steve, you know all about frogs. Can you tell us if these are male or female?" And I said, "Yes, it's really easy. Because they're closely related to the spotted marsh frog, I can just look at their hands and I will know that if they've got the flaps of skin on the first 2 fingers, they're a female. They use that for making the foam nest. If they don't have that, they're a male." So I put my hand in the tank and pulled one out, had a bit of a look and went, "Yes, it's got the flaps of skin on its hand. That's a girl." Grabbed the other one, had a bit of a look. No, there's no flaps of skin on that one. It's either a male or a young female. And given the size, I think it's probably an adult male. So hopefully, if you're lucky, these 2 frogs will breed. They'll create a foam nest containing about 4,500 eggs, and you'll have lots of little tadpoles. I was then driving home, and it was a hot day, and I had a bit of hay fever, and I rubbed my eye, and instantly I realised I had forgotten to wash my hands, and I had rubbed the poison directly into my eyeball. My eyeball puffed up, went bright red, tears were streaming down my face. I was in absolute agony. I pulled my car over and got my water bottle and splashed it all around my face, and that made no difference whatsoever. So I had to get back into the car, carefully drove along one-eyed, and eventually I came to a chemist So I got out the car and I carefully walked into the chemist, and they looked at me like I was a maniac. And I said, no, no. And he goes, what's wrong? And I said, I've got something in my eye. I need to get it out. And he said, oh, have you got a bit of dust or pollen? And I said, no, I've got poison from a frog. And he looked at me like, I'm not sure what to recommend for frog poison in your eye. Maybe you could try these drops. And I said, great, I'll give them a go. Can you put them in for me? And he said, no, I'm not allowed to administer drugs. I'm a chemist, not a doctor or a nurse. I can sell them to you, but you'll have to put them in yourself. Putting eye drops in your own eye at the best of times is not easy. When you've got frog poison in there, it's incredibly difficult. So I had to try to open up my eye and lift up the drops and squeeze them in. But because my eye was all affected by the poison, I couldn't actually see the eye drops. So I had to give it a little bit of a squeeze and hope for the best. First go I squeezed and it ran down my face. No, need to try again. I managed to get some in my eye with the second go, and almost instantly I had relief. I could start getting the vision back in my eye and the pain went away. I don't remember what those eye drops were, so I can't recommend them to you. So my simple recommendation is, if you ever find one of these frogs, wash your hands really well. Don't stick your fingers in your mouth or around your eyes until you've given them a good clean. People have asked me, what would happen if you left it in there? Would you go blind? The simple answer is, I don't know anybody stupid enough to leave it in to find out. Once you get it in there, you want to get it out. So the best thing to do is not get it in there in the first place. So they potentially can have an impact on us, but they are beautiful frogs. They're really important. They're a frog which is often confused with a cane toad. So I always say to people, if you think you've got a cane toad, do not kill it. Call purser and get the frog identified. It could quite easily be one of these eastern banjo frogs, a really important local species. One of the things about the eastern banjo frog is they spend most of their life burrowed underground, only emerging in late spring and summer to breed, and then they'll go back underground again. So they've got these large plates at the base of their foot, which is called a metatarsal tubercle or a spade foot, and they use that for digging. So they will scuff their feet on the ground and they burrow in backwards in a sliding motion, going under the ground, and the dirt will fall in on top of them. And they can go quite a long way underground, a few meters. And then when it rains, they'll come out and they'll go looking for water. And the interesting thing about burrowing in many species of frogs is they burrow away from a water body, so that when they do come up after rain, they have to go looking for water. And you may wonder, why do they burrow away from water? Why not just stay nearby? The problem is, if you burrow right near water, you hit the water table quite quickly and you can actually drown underground. So it's best to move away from the water where the water table is a lot lower and you can burrow underground there. But beautiful, amazing frogs. They do come in a range of different colours. So they can be anything from a pale cream or a pinky brown right through to a dark brown or even a dark purple brown. So beautiful frogs. Some people find them ugly, think they're warty, but I think they're beautiful. They've got these great big eyes, and when you see them hopping across the ground or just sitting there looking around, startled in your light, they're beautiful, beautiful frogs. However, the frog that most people think is the pretty one is called the brown tree frog, which has a wide distribution throughout much of southern Australia. Well, at least that's what we used to say. In February this year, they did some analysis of the brown tree frog, and they actually decided that it's now going to be split up into 3 different species. So down in the southeast of South Australia, they've kept the brown tree frog, but the ones on Kangaroo Island, they've separated out as the Kangaroo Island tree frog, and the ones in the Adelaide Mount Lofty Ranges region, they decided that they wanted to call it the South Australian tree frog. Personally, I hate the name South Australian tree frog. I go, it's not the only tree frog in South Australia, and considering we've got the Kangaroo Island tree frog, it's not the only tree frog which is only in South Australia. So my preference is to call it the Mountain Lofty Ranges tree frog. So that's what I'm going to do from now on. I think it makes more sense. Its distribution is restricted to the Greater Mountain Lofty Ranges region. So it makes sense to me that it should be called the Mountain Lofty Ranges tree frog. So Mountain Lofty Ranges tree frog, again, growing to around about 5 centimetres in size. It's called a tree frog because it has the pads on the fingers and toes. And the width of the pads is about 1.5 times the width of their digits. So they're not massive toe pads like you find in some of the tree frogs, but you can see that they're quite distinct pads on the end of their fingers and toes. They range in colour from a cream through to a dark chocolate brown, and they typically have a darker marking along their back, and they always have that dark stripe running from the nose through the eye to the top of the arms, usually with a little bit of a pale marking under the eye. Quite distinctive. And if you look at the back of their legs, they've got the orange or red markings with the little black spots. And we think this is a form of flash coloration. So basically, this is a colour pattern that they use to trick predators. So if these frogs get attacked, their first instinct is to jump. Mountain Lofty Ranges tree frogs are really good at jumping. And as they jump and stretch out their back legs, you will see that flash of coloration on the back of their legs. So a predator that's looking to eat one of these frogs may see that orange and black patterning and go, that's what I'm looking for when I want to eat this frog. As soon as the frog lands, it'll tuck its arms and legs in and close its eyes and sit really still. And hopefully for the frog, the predator will be busy looking around, trying to see those other colours, won't be able to see them, and will give up and go away. Once the predator has moved, then this frog can start moving again. So it's basically flash colours are like a, now you see me, now you don't, I'll hide and sit really still. Beautiful little frogs. They lay their eggs in small batches attached to the vegetation in the water, as you can see in the picture. If the water quality is a little bit suspect or there's not a lot of water, they typically lay their eggs in small batches and spread them around the water body or the water bodies nearby. If the water's really good, they'll lay a larger clump. And you can sometimes see clumps where multiple pairs of frogs have laid their eggs together and you get this big mass forming. But typically they're made up of lots of little clumps rather than one big one from a single pairing. The mating call for these is interesting. Some people find it really painful and annoying. Other people quite like it. Again, it's a call which is often confused with insects. So people sometimes send in recordings of crickets or cicadas, thinking it's this frog, or they send in a recording not realising that there's a frog on there. This is what it sounds like. The really good thing about these frogs is they start breeding early in winter and they can go through right to the end of spring. And they will call all night, every night until they get a mate. So if you have a male Mountain Lofty Ranges tree frog moving into a pond near your bedroom window, and if they call all night, every night and don't get a mate, this can go on for months. So the noise can get a little bit annoying. And so I always recommend if you are going to put in a frog pond or a frog garden, don't put it near your bedroom window. They can drive you a little bit nuts. But they're beautiful, beautiful frogs. They, as I said, they come in a range of colours. They can actually change colour from pale to dark. So unlike a chameleon, they're not going to go blue, purple, yellow, pink. They just go light brown to dark brown, try to fit in with their surroundings. And despite the fact that they're called a tree frog, you don't typically find the Mount Lofty Ranges tree frog up in the trees. They're normally found in the reeds and the sedges, the grasses, under rocks, under bark, and under logs on the ground. They can climb, but they are not typically going to be climbing way up in the trees. So it's not difficult to see why people really find these ones to be the cute ones around Adelaide. As I mentioned, there are 3 other species of frog which can be found in the region: the painted frog, Bibberns toadlet, and the introduced Perrin's tree frog. If you want to find out more about these frogs, have a look on the Frogs of the Mount Lofty Ranges ID chart, or get onto the FrogWatch website or within the Frog Spotter app to find out some further details about these species and how you might go about identifying them. So that's a quick introduction to the frogs of the region. And now I'd be happy to answer any questions that may have been asked.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steve. Very fascinating. There's a few questions that have come through. Well, someone's already answered it for you, I think. What is the tree frog with the bright green on the body in the Mount Lofty area?
So officially, there isn't one which is bright green.
Okay.
So the Mount Lofty Ranges tree frog does get some of those yellowy green colours, but it's not a brilliant green. The brown tree frog down in the southeast of South Australia, you do get green ones, but I have never seen one which I would consider to be bright green around Adelaide and the Adelaide Hills. So if anybody ever sees one and gets a picture, I'd love to see it.
Yep, awesome. And from that, do frogs change colour and texture over their lifetime?
Yes,
is that a phenomenon? Yep.
Yes, and as I was saying with the Mount Lofty Ranges tree frog, they can change colour within a day. So just to try to match in with their surroundings. So they're not, as I said, not like the chameleon where they're going to go brilliant colours. It's usually between light and dark, just to try to blend in a little bit with their surroundings.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, apparently someone has photos. So I think it's Nicola. Yeah, so send them on through to Steve. He'd love to see them. So
absolutely.
Fantastic. And another one around, the 4 frogs that we focused on today, are they increasing or decreasing their kind of distribution around Adelaide? Do you have any kind of intel into that?
Yeah, I think they're generally pretty stable, although I do feel like I haven't been listening to as many recordings of the spotted marsh frog as I used to. But some of the spots where you find it, you do still find it in quite high numbers. So like I showed in the video when I turned over that log, there were still lots of frogs there. They just don't seem to appear in the surveys as much as they have in the past. And that may be just there's not enough people sending in surveys of them. So I'd certainly encourage more people to send in surveys. And especially if you are doing something like a revegetation project or you're responsible for managing the waterway, if you can do recordings before you do the revegetation work and then continue to do them afterwards, it's a really good way that you can track how well your revegetation work has impacted on the frogs.
Awesome. Yeah, fantastic. Can you identify frogs from egg floats?
With the spotted marsh frog and the eastern banjo frog, they're the 2 that we have which have got the foam nests. The foam nest of the spotted marsh frog, as I said, about 5 to 7 centimetres across, where the eastern banjo frog you're looking at 15, 20 centimetres across, so much bigger. The common froglet and the Mount Lofty Ranges tree frog lay their eggs in clumps. They can be really tricky to distinguish between the 2. So sometimes you can, sometimes it's a bit harder.
Yeah, definitely. And another one around what people can do in their backyards in terms of, building ponds and that kind of thing? Do you need to be close to a creek? What do you kind of recommend? I know that we've got some resources that we can share with people afterwards around this one, but if people do want to attract frogs to their suburban backyards.
Yeah, so my general story is, if you build it, they will come. And the main consideration is frogs don't spend a lot of their time in water. Most of the time they're out and about in the garden looking for food and hiding from predators. So if you really want to encourage frogs, the number one thing you can do is to plant vegetation, especially flowering plants, which are going to attract the insects, which the frogs will then eat. So if you want frogs, lots of vegetation, lots of native vegetation attracting those bugs to your garden, and the obvious things like not using any sprays, containing your pets to make it easy for these frogs, and lots of bark and rocks on the ground that they can seek shelter under.
Fantastic. Do you have any tips for the broader restoration of creek lines and stormwater channels to help support frog populations or encourage them in urban areas? So, people working in Friends of groups or along the rivers, and how important are reeds and rushes?
Yes, so the reeds and rushes and sedges, they are going to provide the spots where the frogs can attach their eggs when they're breeding. So you want to have lots of vegetation in the water. And the reeds and sedges will also help slow the water down a little bit. So that makes it a little bit easier for the tadpoles, so that they're not in the rapids trying to swim against the white water, make it nice and easy for them. And the main thing is having lots of vegetation on the edge of the waterways and beyond. So don't concentrate just within the channel of the stream. You want to provide that habitat just like you would in a garden, where the frogs can go, seek shelter and find food.
Awesome. Fantastic. And we've got some resources that we can share with everybody afterwards, and Nat's put some of those in the chat for us now as well. Is the I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, is the citride fungus affecting the frogs you mentioned in your talk? If so, more or less than in other states?
Okay, so it's chytrid fungus is how it's pronounced.
Chytrid, great.
Chytrid, yep.
Got it.
It is a fungus which seems to have more of an impact in the tropical areas and the cooler areas. So it has been recorded around Adelaide, but so far it doesn't seem to have had as big an impact as it has in other parts of Australia and globally. So there have been some frog die-offs down around Bull Lagoon, which have been linked to the chytrid fungus, but there haven't been any major ones around Adelaide. It seems to be that the hot, drier conditions that we experience over summer, and even slightly drier winters than some of those other areas, make it less favourable for the chytrid fungus. But certainly if you start finding lots of dead frogs, it's worth reporting that so it can be investigated further.
And where do people report that type of thing, Steve?
PIRSA
that's PIRSA, isn't it? Yep. Yeah. Fantastic. Got another question here. What do you think of frog hotels?
It depends on the frog hotel.
Yeah.
So a lot of the frog hotels have been designed for the larger tree frogs. So if you're living up in the tropics where you get lots of green tree frogs and other tree frogs, they will make use of them. Locally, the Mount Lofty Ranges tree frog will make use of them if they're small enough. So some of the tubing that they use is quite large. And considering we've got little frogs, they're going to use it less commonly. But if you use smaller pipes, they'll make use of that. And if you are doing the vertical pipes, the frogs have to be able to climb to get in it. So great for tree frogs, not so good for ground frogs, and probably not going to be used at all by the burrowing frogs. So they have their place. But I would say the best thing to do is have natural vegetation, provide that habitat that they can move into.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was going to say as well. Yeah, wouldn't it be better to actually have the real vegetation rather than piping or plastic or any other kind of substance in the environment that could just become litter. Yeah,
I guess it's a little bit like a nest box for birds and possums. They have their use, as a short-term measure, much better to restore the habitat for them.
Yeah, excellent. Oh yeah, that person only has a balcony to work from, so yeah, trying to attract it that way. That's the thing, isn't it? Yeah, things are valid for certain contexts.
Yes.
Another interesting question from Nat: do all the different frogs get along? Do they interact, or is there one that doesn't like the other?
Yeah, the general rule is frogs of a similar size are normally happy together. If you have big frogs and little frogs together, you usually end up with just big frogs because they've eaten the little ones. But
so they do eat each other.
Yeah, that video that I showed when I turned over the log and all the frogs scattered, there were actually 3 species of frog in there. Most of them were the spotted marsh frog, but there were a few common froglets and Matloft Ranges tree frogs under there as well.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, that's great. And what someone's asking, if they disturb a frog, what should they do with it? Just leave it alone, or
leave it alone. Yeah. So if you're gardening and you accidentally dig it up, you move it to the side, let it seek some shelter in the vegetation there. Or if it's in a sand pit, you could cover it back up with a bit of sand.
Yeah.
The best thing to do is leave them alone.
Yeah. They'll find their own way back to shelter. Yeah. Someone's following on from that other thing. Yeah. If they eat each other, do they eat their tadpoles as well?
Most of the frogs that we have in Australia only eat out of water. So they don't typically jump in and feed off other things in the water. They're mainly on the land, or that if they're in the water, they'll catch something flying past. They're not diving under the water to catch things.
Okay, well, that's interesting. An interesting one. Just any update on the verified cane toad sighting near Darlington?
Yeah, I've got no more information than anybody else.
On that one? Yeah,
I saw the post that said that they had been found in Bedford Park, and that's all that I know about it. But yeah, so one of the things is if people can go out and make recordings using Frog Spotter, if cane toads are around, we'll pick them up if they call, so we can track how they go. Yeah,
excellent. I'm just checking because I might have another question over in the Q&A action. Yeah, I do. I've tried to record frogs, but any movement to retrieve my phone stops their call. How do I overcome this?
Don't move.
Don't move. Yeah, you have to be ultra still.
Yeah. That's the
test
thing.
in not moving.
Yeah. So it's amazing how long 3 minutes is when you're not allowed to move or make any noise. You just got to stand there. Sometimes you feel like a bit of a wally, just standing there recording, and you see people walking along, and you think, "Don't come over, don't make any noise. I'm trying to record the frogs." But just try to sit really still, let the frogs call, and make the recording.
And another kind of recording question here as well. I'm now wondering if noise is not crickets, but the first frog mentioned. How do you know the difference between the crickets and the frogs? I think that is, do you just get better with that over time?
A bit of experience, yeah. One of the things is that typically crickets are fairly monotonous in their call. So they'll just be similar pitched and they'll just have the same pulses going on, whereas frogs will go up and down a little bit and they'll have pauses between the pulses. Awesome. But I would just say, make a recording, send it in, and I'll let you know if there's frogs.
Yeah. So the more that you do, the more you'll get verification, and that's why that process works. So good luck with that, Lisa. Where's the most surprising place? We might finish on this one. Where's the most surprising place you found a frog, Steve?
In a public toilet is probably the funniest place. So a few years ago, I went up to Purnong Landing, which is just past Mannum, with a bunch of frog enthusiasts, and we pulled up at the car park, and there's a public toilet block there right near the ferry, and I jokingly said, I'm just going to go into the toilets and catch a frog, and they all laughed at me, and I walked in there planning just to go to the toilet, but sitting on top of the toilet was a parent's tree frog. So I just picked it up and walked out and went, got one. And they were going, Joe, you know, you're not serious. And I know, I've got one. Made me look like an expert.
Oh dear, classic. That's amazing. Someone else was sharing about how they dug a hole as a kid next to Torrens Weir and found a huge toad approximately 40 years old. So people have had, yeah, and other people are sharing that, you know, often in Queensland, they're always in the toilet. So
Yeah.
not so much in South Australia. So that's good.
And that toad that was dug up near the Torrens, that was most likely an eastern banjo frog.
Ah, there you go. Here, yep. Also, where can people buy your book, Steve?
It's some of the online suppliers have them.
Yep.
I know James at For Nature has had them in the past.
Okay, so we'll share some links for that as well for people to grab afterwards.
And
Fantastic.
I try to take them along if I'm doing a frog event somewhere as well, that people can get a copy.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. Oh, wait, there's one final question that's come through and we do have a few more minutes. I'll see whether you can ask it. Oh no, I think it's just an interesting story. Oh no, actually they're wanting to know if it's species. When the Murray River was flooded a couple of years ago, I started dragging a boat into the water at the edge and an army of very dark frogs with quite pointy noses jumped about. Any idea what species they could have been?
I wouldn't be surprised if they were the spotted marsh frog. If they've got quite a pointy nose and they're quite dark. Or it could have possibly been Perrin's tree frog if it was one of the tree frogs. They love hiding on places like jetties, piers, in boats, and so they will scatter if they get disturbed as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Awesome. Well, thank you all for all your questions and your stories. There's lots of great comments coming through, Steve. So thanks once again for sharing your wisdom and your passion for frogs and for conserving ecosystems today. And thanks to everyone that will join and I'm sure watch this session later on and learn some new bits and bobs about frogs so that they can get out there. So we hope that more of you will use the app and help out with those censuses over the coming years. So we will send out an email with some of the links and information that's been referred to today. And our next session in the series coming up is diving into blue carbon with Dr. Sophie Russell and Dr. Emily Lydon. I hope I'm pronouncing that all right, who will introduce the concept of blue carbon and explain how these coastal environments efficiently capture and store carbon, making them key players in global climate mitigation efforts, which I'm really excited to learn more about this one. So we'll email you all with the date and time so you can register for that one as well. So thanks so much for joining us today. And I think I'm finishing us off just with one early minute as well. So thank you so much and have a great evening. We'll see you at the next session. Thanks, Steve.
You're welcome.